Hi everybody, I'm Professor Rad, and today we're going to talk about how to graph fractions. In Chapter 5a, we looked at visualizing fractions on a like candy bar or a pizza, and now we're going to visualize them on a number line. So in this first note that we have here, what it's basically saying is that if you want to graph a fraction or a mixed number on a number line, you want to break each unit up the same way we were breaking up candy bars, and use that to help guide you graph the fractions. So this note is going to make more sense in context. So let's go ahead and do this first example here, example 8. It says graph each of these numbers on a number line. So let's start out by graphing this first fraction here, 2/3. Now, if I have a proper fraction, meaning the top is smaller than the bottom, then that fraction is going to be between 0 and 1. Because I haven't eaten an entire candy bar, but I ate more than no candy bar. So this fraction 2/3 is going to live in between 0 and 1. So ordinarily I would do this in pencil, but I don't think pencil will show up very well on screen, so I'm going to use blue. But I would strongly encourage you, when you graph these, use pencil because there's erasing involved. So I'm going to envision this candy bar that stretches from 0 to 1. Now, the bottom number of the fraction tells you how many pieces your candy bar is cut up into. So we're going to cut this up into 3 equal-sized pieces. You want to be as equal as you can here. Then the top number tells you how many of those pieces you ate. So the top number is 2, so we ate 2 of those pieces. I'm going to start shading in from 0 because I think of it like I started with 0 pieces of candy in my belly, and then I'm moving towards an entire candy bar. Basically how I think of it. So where I ended is where I graph the point on the number line. You can do this without having to draw the whole candy bar by just taking this interval from 0 to 1, splitting it up into 3 equal pieces, 1, 2, 3, and putting the dot at the second one because the numerator was 2. So I'm going to do this next fraction, and I'm going to do it in the reverse. So I will do on the number line first, and then we'll draw the candy bar so we can see it matches up. Now this next fraction is negative as well, so I'm going to have to bear that in mind when I go ahead to graph it. When you have a negative fraction, that means you're going to be starting at 0 and moving to the left. In this case, it's a negative proper fraction, so it's going to end up between 0 and -1. The denominator is 4, so I'm going to break that interval up into 4 equal-sized pieces. I have a numerator of 1, so I'm starting to move away from 0, and I'm going to move one of those 4 spaces. And that's my -1/4. In terms of candy bars, it would start at 0, and it's going to go down to -1, so that's where my candy bar lives. The denominator is 4, so we're going to cut that up into 4 equal-sized pieces. And we ate a quarter of that candy bar. Now, we start at 0 and we head towards the bigger numbers. So starting at 0, when I eat that quarter, there's that one piece that I ate. And now we can see that where this ends is the same as where we plotted that point. So you can use either the candy bar or breaking up that interval to guide you when you graph your fractions. Now, for this third fraction here, this fraction is positive, so I know I'm going to move to the right of 0. But I'm also noticing that it's an improper fraction. We have 11 out of 6. So you have a choice. You can change this into a mixed number, or you can graph it as an improper fraction. So I'm going to graph this as an improper fraction because in our next example, we're going to graph some mixed numbers. So to graph the improper fraction, on this one, I'm just going to focus on the positive side because this is a positive fraction. And the denominator is 6. So I'm going to cut each of these intervals. So from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, I'm going to cut each of those into 6 equal-sized pieces. So here's from 0 to 1. I can cut that in half, and each half I can cut into thirds. And that'll get me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces. So I'm going to do that for each of these intervals. Cut them in half, and then cut the halves in thirds. From 2 to 3, cut it in half, and then each of those halves in thirds. And then from 3 to 4, cut it in half, and each of those into thirds. So that between any two whole numbers, I should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces because their denominator is 6. Now I'm going to start at 0 and I'm going to count 11 spaces. So I don't count this first line I'm starting on, and then this next line is going to be 1. So counting to 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So this 11th one is where I'm going to plot my point, and that is our 11/6. And there we go. That is how you can graph an improper fraction. And again, you could make the little candy bars too if you wanted to, but you can see why pencil's helpful because here we had thirds, here I've got 6, here I had quarters. So what I would probably do is I would erase each of these lines after graphing each number since they have different denominators. So let's go ahead and graph some mixed numbers. So mixed numbers give you a starting point that isn't 0, and then you graph the fraction in the next interval. So, for example, if I'm going to graph 3.5, I'm going to start at 3, and then I'm going to break that next interval up. So going from 3 to 4. So when we had proper fractions, for example, 2/3, we split up going from 0 to 1. For a mixed number, all that's different is instead of starting at 0, you start at the big number and you go to the next one. So we're starting at 3, we're going to 4. Now we're going to graph the fraction in that space. So our fraction had a denominator of 2, so we cut that in half. And we had 1/2, so that's where we plot the point. And if we get out of our heads a little bit here, 3.5 is like halfway between 3 and 4, right? So that's where that should be. It makes sense to where we would expect it to be. All right, let's try this next one. Now this next one is negative. So remember, with negative numbers, instead of moving to the right, you're going to move to the left. So we're going to start at -2, and we're going to go to the left. That's the interval we break up. So we start at -2, and we go to the left. We're going to split this interval up into 5 equal-sized pieces. And I don't know if you've noticed, but every time I cut this up, I draw one fewer line, right? To cut this up into 5 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines were drawn so that I would get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. And now I want to go to the 4th one. So I'm starting at -2 and I count to the 4th of those little lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. That is my -2 and 4/5. All right, we've got one more mixed number that they would like us to graph, and this is -1 and 1/8. So I start at -1, and I'm going to go over to the -2. Since it's negative, I move to the left. If it was positive, I'd move to the right. I've got to split this up into 8 equal-sized pieces. So let's make sure we did that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 equal-sized pieces. And starting at -1, we want the very first one of those lines. So I move one line and plot the point. -1 and 1/8. All right, cool. So just like we did when we graphed integers and real numbers on a number line, once you get accustomed to graphing these on number lines, we can turn the number line sideways and make some bar graphs. Okay, so Selma is making some cookies, and she wonders if different recipes call for different amounts of sugar for each of the cookies. So she makes a table of 5 of her favorite cookies, which we've got here on the right, and along with the amount of granulated sugar. So here's how many cups of granulated sugar she needs, and we're going to create a bar graph for this. So I'm going to have to shift this so that the table goes off the screen. So if you want to pause and kind of copy these down to make the bar graph with me, feel free to do so now. Okay, and so now I'm going to get to my graphing space here, and we're going to draw our cookies. So the chocolate crinkle cookies required 1 3/4 cups of sugar. So I'm going to just I'm going to jot this down here just for reference, since we can't see my bar graph, or my my table. So this is off screen. So I'm just going to write the amounts down here as reference. Yeah, why don't I do that? So then the date pinwheels only needed 1/3 of a cup of sugar. The gingerbread cookies, or the ginger cookies, needed 1 2/3. The shortbread needed 3/16. Oh my gosh. And then sugar cookies needed 1 1/2. Okay. So let's start out with the chocolate crinkle cookies. We're going to graph this mixed number. We've got 1 3/4. So remember, to graph a mixed number, you start at that number. And so we're going to be starting at the height of our bar at 1. And we're going to break up this interval going from 1 to 2. We need to break it up into 4 equal-sized pieces, since the denominator of that fraction is a 4. And check it out, they already did that for us. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. So each of these lines represents a 4th. Cool. So for my chocolate crinkle cookies, I need to go to the 3rd of those. So I'm going to start at 1, and I'm going to go to the 1, 2, 3rd line. So here would be my 1 3/4. So I'm going to draw my chocolate crinkle cookie bar, going up to 1 3/4. And I like to shade in my bars usually, just so I can see them a little bit more easily. You don't have to, but I like to. Plus it makes the graph look a little bit nicer. Okay, next let's do the date pinwheels. So for the date pinwheel, we have a proper fraction. It's just 1/3. So that means we have to split up the interval going from 0 to 1, and we have to split it up into 3 equal-sized pieces. So they've already split it up into 4 pieces, which is going to throw me a little bit. So I kind of have to pretend like these lines aren't here and think about where thirds might be. Again, it's helpful to do this in pencil so you can kind of gauge it. Let me see if I can estimate here with some pencil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this sideways to help me out. So yeah, you can kind of see that. So this is my line going from 0 to 1. And I'm going to split that up into thirds. So maybe here and here. So we've got 1/3 going this way, 1/3 here, and 1/3 here. That kind of looks like thirds. Okay. So for my date pinwheel, I need to go to the very first one, starting from the bottom. So starting from the bottom, I'm going to end up about here. And now I'm going to erase that guideline I made. For my graph. And shade that in. All right. So I'm gonna ask you to pause the video here and see if you can't figure out how to draw each of these next three. And that when you've got that done, you can unpause the video and I'll have my work on screen and I'll talk through how I worked through it. See you soon. All right, so let's see how we did. So what I did here is the stuff that I drew in pencil, I drew over in black marker or black pen, so we can kind of see my work a little bit better here to give you a sense of how I drew this. But just like I did with the date pinwheels, the stuff that I have in these black lines here, when I was all done, I probably would have erased that to make kind of a cleaner look to my bar graph. Okay, this is sort of like my scratch work, right? Or like if you're drawing, it's like, you know, the shapes that you use to get the general shape of whatever it is you're trying to draw. So for my ginger cookies, I had 1 2/3. So that told me I was going to start at 1, go up to 2, and I had to split that up into 3 equal pieces. So I turned this to the side again and I split it up into 1, 2, 3 equal intervals. And because the numerator this time was a 2, I needed to go up to that second line. For shortbread, this one made me sigh at first because the denominator was 16. So it's a proper fraction, so it goes from 0 to 1. So I had to break that interval up into 16 pieces. But the good news is I know that 4 is a factor of 16. I know that 4 times 4 is 16. And so they gave me these grid lines of fourths already. So I just cut each of those fourths up into 4 pieces. So if we count from the top line, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 for each of those to get my 16ths. Then the shortbread went up to the third one. So I counted 1, 2, 3, and that's where I put my line. And then for the sugar cookies, it was 1 1/2. So we had a mixed number again. So that meant I was going to go from 1 to 2. So starting here, going up to the top. And I just cut that into half. So the bottom 2/4 and then the top 2/4, right? Just put that line halfway between 1 and 2. So the sugar cookie bar goes up to 1 1/2. All right, how did you do on your bar graph? Alrighty, so here are some problems for you to try on your own. So part A here, we've got some fractions for us to practice graphing on a number line. Part B, we've got some mixed numbers, and for part C, we have a mixture of mixed numbers and fractions. And then part D, some was also recorded how much flour was in each cookie. So we're going to create a bar graph of flour. So this is going to wrap up chapter 5B for us. In the next chapter, we'll talk about simplifying fractions. Basically, when we drew pictures of fractions, we noticed we could use the picture to tell if 2 fractions were the same or not, but sometimes the pictures were really kind of hard to decipher, so we wanted to come up with a new strategy. And that's the strategy we're going to talk about next time. So I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope you have a magnificent day. Bye for now, everyone.